All right, we are looking at an overview of this chapter, Eggen and Kauchak, Learning and Effective Teaching. This is just to provide kind of an overview of some of the content here, and there is planned redundancy, so don't get too confused. You're going to see these concepts a couple times. First of all, planning for instruction. Effective teachers at all levels plan. Winging it is for the birds. Your planning will look different in 5 years than it does now, but effective teachers plan. This ensures that you know what to say and it's presented in some sort of meaningful context. How do you choose topics to teach if you are a teacher? Well, of course, the best way in literacy, and I'm an old literacy professor, is to look at your students and see what skills they need. That's called kid watching. That is the best way to teach literacy. That should be your curriculum, your scope and sequence. However, generally, social studies, math, whatever, you choose topics within a curriculum. Now, the curriculum that you have should not be your Bible. It should be your guide to give you a sense of what students need. As a literacy person, you should look at your students to see what skills they need. You know your students more than the person who designed the curriculum out in New York someplace. When you put together a lesson, think about you are teaching. What you don't include in a lesson is just as important as what you do. Good teachers are defined not by what they tell, not by what they say, but by what students learn. Now, real learning cannot be assessed on a standardized test. Real learning, according to cognitive psychology and neuroscience, occurs up here. It's a change in thinking, the ability to use information somehow. So when you're putting together your lesson, and it's very common that you're going to have to do additional research. Don't depend on a teacher's manual in any subject. That should be your guide, not a recipe. Good teachers go beyond and they plan. They decide what their students need. And again, what you don't include is just as important as what you do include. Objectives help focus instruction. They should be purposeful. Now, I don't believe in behavioral objectives generally, but I'm going to talk about it because that kind of is that is in vogue right now. But let's just pretend that we're using a behavioral objective. You always start with a purpose statement first. Sometimes this is called a goal. For example, students will learn about amphibians, or students will learn how to do long division. That is the purpose of this lesson that I am planning. It's not an objective, it is a behavioral statement. Then, once I have the purpose of what I'm doing, then I can put it into a behavior that I would like to see at the end of the lesson. As a result of my teaching, students will be able to. That is my behavioral objective. And here are some examples. You can stop the video and you can see, but I can say yes or no specifically. Students were able to do this. A behavioral objective should be one sentence. One sentence, what you want students to be able to do. Now, assessment is often based on the behavioral objective. This is a description of how you will check for learning. I recommend this be written last because often what you're going to say, what you're going to assess is determined by what is in the lesson. And as you begin planning the lesson, your objective may change slightly and your assessment may change slightly. So do that last. But this is a written description of exactly how you will assess learning, usually 2 to 6 sentences. And you can stop the tape right there. Now, I do not believe in putting an assessment plan in a lesson plan. Why? Not every lesson should be assessed. There are places to assess. Good assessment is like taking soil samples here and there, checking to see if students are learning. So not every lesson should be assessed. We need to trust our students to do their learning. There are also, get away from the idea that assessments only happen through paper and pencil, or an assignment, or a standardized test. Assessment comes in a variety of ways. A lot of times I can tell how learning is happening. Large and small group discussions. I create cooperative learning groups. I have projects. There's a place for a worksheet. Worksheets are tools. They can be used. Any tool's effectiveness is determined by how they're used. Some sort of performance. I can use a quiz, either that day or a couple down the line. Again, every lesson does not have to have an assessment. Get rid of that. We need to be teachers, not measurers. A lot more teaching allows students to learn, a lot less measuring. Tests are okay if used sporadically. I like the tell me statement, tell me about, or the I learned statement. What did you learn about? Here's an I learned statement about economics, myself, humans, all right? That gives me a sense of how students are constructing knowledge. Small group speeches, and this will be talked about other places, but various type of activities to see what, how, and to what degree learning is taking place. A good teacher is a kid watcher, creating activities where students are able to use, apply, extend the knowledge or skill, and then watching to see what happens, how they are learning. There's places for traditional assessment, again, but not every lesson should be assessed. Now, questions. This is just an overview of questions within a lesson plan. Do not depend on spur-of-the-moment questions. Questions should be purposeful and aligned with the lesson based on your purpose statement. So that means you need to plan them ahead of time and put them in your lesson exactly where you're going to ask them. That does not mean you can't be flexible and skip them or ask other questions, but it just means that you have thought through the lesson plan. Include both high-level and low-level questions. Low-level questions are burp-it-up detail questions. High-level questions are questions for which you do not know the answer. What do you think? What do you think will happen? What's your idea? High and low. When asking a question, ask the question and then pause. That's called wait time, anywhere from 3 to 7 seconds before calling on students. There is a tendency, especially when you're a little nervous, to ask a question and call on students right away to keep them engaged. Students need to process, especially younger students, and would be looking at some specific strategies for that. Now this chapter talks about direct instruction. That is, some people call it a model, and it is a title for a specific scripted strategy. I describe it as a strategy, not a method or model of instruction. All right. It is a strategy. All teachers believe in direct instruction. It is a tool, but if that's all you're doing with all subject areas, in your literacy, in reading, if you're only doing direct instruction, you are not being effective. It is one strategy, all right? Some people describe it as a model of instruction. That is incorrect. It should not be a model. It is one strategy of many that teachers should have. Direct instruction has been found to be good for teaching low-level skills and concepts, but not high-level thinking and concepts. And again, all teachers should have this very valuable tool, know the essence of direct instruction, but it is one of many tools. Now, it tends to be overused with struggling readers, especially readers with learning disabilities or intellectual disabilities. That's all they get is direct instruction of reading subskills, and that is not an effective use of time, and it kills any motivation they may have had for reading in the first place. And again, direct instruction is a strategy, a very important strategy, but it is not a method or an approach to teaching anything. It should never be used exclusively. Good teachers have lots of tools in their teaching toolbox. If the only tool you have is direct instruction, you are extremely limited. Parts and forms of this thing called direct instruction vary, and I've talked about it, and your textbook talks about it. Do not think that there's one form that must be. Behavioral objectives again, and again, many forms of direct instruction use behavioral objectives. You can say yes or no if the students achieved it or not. Many forms of direct instruction have an overview or a preview. They tell the learner what is to be learned. In this lesson, we are going to learn about A, B, C. Many forms of direct instruction have the input. That's the specific information that you want students to know. It is the steps, step 1, step 2, step 3. And then guided practice, that's scaffolding used to practice learning. Provide them a scaffold so they're not frustrated. Part of the answer, and we'll be talking about scaffolding a little bit later. But here you are watching your students, you're giving them a scaffold, you're practicing what they've learned. And then the independent practice or an activity. That should be, practice of what has already been learned, to reinforce, to apply, to extend something you gave them in the input. If you're doing your jobs, students should be able to complete the independent practice with 95 to 100% success ratio. All right? Transactional model of instruction, you can see there's all different forms of direct instruction, but I've given you just the basic parts. If you understand the basic parts, you can understand when all other bells and whistles are applied. But I like just the basic parts, knowing again that there's various methods and models of direct instruction, but most direct instruction has just these 4, 5 basic parts. All right. And again, I prefer a purpose statement over a behavioral objective for a variety of reasons. And then this chapter talks about guided discovery. Now, discovery learning is not simply fishing around to find something. Discovery learning must be planned. And again, just like direct instruction, it is a powerful tool to have. It's not either or, guided or direct. One is not more effective than the other. They are both tools. You create some sort of structure that enables students to discover some or all parts of a concept or skill. Inductive analysis, it's sometimes called. It is planned. You are teaching for a specific input. I want students to learn about amphibians. They have an amphibian experience to learn something, to discover something, and then I give them specific lesson input. Discovery learning is based on our natural inclination to find out about the world, to mess around, to experiment. And again, discovery learning is not just discover, fish around. It is very structured. It's very planned. It is a higher level teaching skill. And again, direct instruction is not a method. It's not an approach that you use across the board. It is one strategy, and it's a very powerful strategy that you should have in your teaching toolbox. The same with cooperative learning. It's a structured learning experience in which groups work together to complete a specific task. And again, it's not either or. Cooperative learning is a powerful tool that you should have in your teaching toolbox as well. It's not a method. It's not an approach. It is one research-based strategy. In cooperative learning, and again, it's not just go back and work in a group or discuss this in a small group. You have to have structure, interdependence, where each person has a role or something to do in that group. And this is just an overview. I'll give you more instruction on this in another video. Cooperative learning takes planning, and it takes a little bit more time in class, these activities. It's a pedagogical school to enhance learning. Takes more time, but students learn more deeply. They're conversing as you're sharing and understanding. You have to interact with ideas at a deeper level. And again, like direct instruction, guided learning, guided discovery learning, it is a strategy. It's not an approach or a method. Think about these strategies like golf clubs. A 9-iron is good for some things. A driver is good for other things, but no single club should be used all across the board. Same with these strategies. All right, this has been just a basic overview of the information covered in this chapter. I did not go over flipped instruction, but I gave you some ideas that you can use about this in another video.